the presiding chancellor, the deputy chancellor in charge of administration, the deputy chancellor in charge of academics, the director of studies, faculty members, course advisor, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Mbu Trustin Yawake. I am here to do a presentation on the comprehensive analysis of educational psychology and learning theories. A comprehensive scholarly presentation of key concepts in teaching and learning. This presentation is an embodiment of 10 different questions that I am going to be answering in this presentation with aim to give a comprehensive analysis and understanding as to what um, educational psychology is and the importance of the same. Educational psychology is a branch of psychology that deals with the scientific study of how individuals learn, including the cognitive, the emotional, and the social influences, according to Santrop. And it is a field of psychology that is very important for the following reasons. It enhances the teacher's understanding of how students acquire, how students retain, and how students apply knowledge. It helps to develop effective instructional strategies for both the teacher and the learner. It informs curriculum design and classroom management techniques. Educational psychology is a tool through which policymakers, curriculum developers, and educationists are able to gain insight into improving educational practices. The behavioral and the cognitive theories of learning. The behavioral theories focus on observable behaviors influenced by environmental stimuli. And key theories here involve the B.M. Skinner's operant conditioning, which is learning through reinforcement and punishment. Example of such has to do with a situation where a teacher rewards a student with praise for completing an assignment, or a teacher punishes a student to dissuade him or her from a vice action or a wrong attitude in class or a poor performance in an exam or an assessment. We also have the Ivan Pavlov's classical conditioning, that is associating stimuli to produce response. This has to do with situations where students feeling anxious before a test due to a past poor performance. And so Ivan believes that this kind of conditioning can either make or mar students' performances. And so these are ways through which teachers can be able to observe and know what the needs of the students are and how to each them overcome those challenges in order to get perform better in their learning process. Then we have the cognitive theories. The cognitive theories emphasize internal mental processing in learning. And the key theorists are Jean Piaget's constructivism, which is learning that occurs in developmental stages. An example has to do with a situation where young children struggle with abstract concepts but excel in hands on learning activities. We have the Vygotsky socio-cultural theory that has to do with learning that occurs through social interactions. A situation where a student learns better through peer discussion and scaffolding than it is with other situations. Let's take a look at the schema theory and its implication for teaching. The schema here refers to mental structures that help individuals organize and interpret information. According to Bartelt, a child learning about birds may initially classify all flying creatures as birds until their schema is refined. An implication of this teaching is that it helps in activating prior knowledge before introducing new material. In other words, it helps teachers to begin with what is known to what is unknown. Using concept mapping to help students build connections. It encourages students to recognize and to also refine their schema over time. Let's look at the rule of feedback in learning. The constructive response provided to learners to enhance understanding. That is what is meant by the feedback in learning. A constructive response provided to learners to enhance understanding. And the types of feedback will have to do with formative feedback, which is an ongoing help that improves learning. We have summative feedback, that is an evaluative learning at the end of a unit. And then we have some strategies for effective feedback. And the very first one is an immediate and specific feedback, which occurs when a lesson takes place and immediately after the lesson, the teacher requires the student to be able to give a feedback as to whether or not they understood the concept of the lesson. And it could be done through a quiz, it could be done through a question and answer session. We also have balancing positive reinforcement with corrective guidance. In a situation where students' feedback do not truly reflect what has just been taught, the teacher has the responsibility to correctively re-guide the student into understanding the previously taught concept in order to enhance understanding and retention. There is also the aspect of encouraging self-assessment and peer feedback. And self-assessment has to do with students having to go through what they have learned to be able to ascertain whether they themselves were able to understand the concept very well, or having to discuss what they have learned with their peers in order to evaluate the extent to which they were able to understand what was taught. We have cognitive development and its implication. According to Piaget stages of cognitive development, we have four of these stages. And the very first one is the sensory motor, which is between birth and the age of 2. And here, learning is through sensory interactions. Then we have the pre operational, that occurs between the ages of 2 and 7 years. And it is characterized by symbolic thinking that develops within this period. Then we have the concrete operational that occurs between the ages of 7 and 11 years, which has to do with the logical reasoning that emerges. Then we have the formal operational that is from 11 years and above, and this has to do with abstract reasoning that is developed. Like I said earlier, these stages of cognitive development were brought about by Piaget. We also have uh, Vygotsky's sociocultural perspective that has to do with learning that is mediated through social interactions and language. An example is where a teacher is using peer tutoring to help students grasp new concept. Having carried out a particular lesson in class, and the teacher want to ensure that everyone in class was able to grasp the concept, the teacher can ask fellow students, can ask students in class to be able to interact with their fellow students to know whether or not they were able to fully grasp the concept. And the responsibility of a teacher during this period is to make sure that while this is going on, the teacher guides the process and also helps in evaluating the students' responses to their peers' questions or probably assessment in order to know whether or not the concepts were fully grasped. We also have the rule of culture in learning and behavior. This is how culture influences learning styles. Some cultures emphasize collaborative learning, while others will focus on individualistic achievement. And it depends on where you come from and what your culture is tilted towards that probably will influence the way you actually carry out learning wherever you find yourself. We have examples such as students from collectivist cultures that may prefer group work, whereas individualistic cultures may value independent projects. Then there is also the aspect of promoting cultural sensitivity within classrooms, and which has to do with encouraging multicultural perspective in the curriculum. There must be the needs to avoid cultural bias in assessment. And there must also be the use of diverse teaching materials that will reflect students' background to make sure that everyone within the classroom follows up with what is being taught. Then we have validity and reliability in assessment. Validity is the extent to which an assessment measures what it is intended to measure. According to Messick, Messi projected this concept in 1995, where he taught that the extent to which a teacher will be able to measure the intended outcome of an assessment based on the envisaged outcome he was looking forward to is known as validity. Reliability, posited by Cronbach in 1951, is the consistency of assessment results over time. Now, why is validity and reliability important? It ensures fairness in a student's evaluation. It ensures fairness in students' evaluation. It also enhances the credibility of the assessment data. Let's look at the comparative or comparison of assessment strategies. Comparison of assessment strategies. We're going to be looking at the formative, the summative, and the authentic. When we are discussing these assessment strategies, let's look first at their definition. When we're talking about the formative, we are looking about an ongoing assessment to monitor the learning process. And we are talking about the summative, we are talking about evaluating the learning at the end of a course or a unit. When we are talking about the authentic, we are looking at the assessing real world application of these skills. Let's look at quick examples of these various strategies. For the formative strategy, the assessment is done through quizzes, classroom discussions. For summative, the assessment is done through final exams and standardized tests. For the authentic, it is done through portfolios and project-based learning. Now let's look at emotional intelligence in teaching and learning. Emotional intelligence, also referred to as EI, it is the ability to recognize, to understand, and to manage emotion, according to Gelman. And there are 5 components of emotional intelligence. The first one has to do with self awareness, self regulation, motivation, empathy, and social skills. And the implications for teaching has to do with building strong teacher-student relationships. And it also encourages emotional self-regulation in students. When a teacher or a student is able to identify any of these, the teacher will be able to understand how to deal with students at every given level based on the components of these emotional intelligence. And the final thing we'll be paying attention to is the role of technology in learning. First, technology enhances accessibility and engagement. I am able to carry out a PhD course in educational psychology because of the availability of the internet. And I'm able to make this video because I have the opportunity to use a camera, to use a phone that has a camera. That's the importance of technology. It supports personalized learning. At this level, I do not need to sit in a formal classroom to learn. But whatever my fellow classmates are doing somewhere else, I'm doing the same here. And this makes us work individually within the same context, learning the same things, and probably at the same time. Using learning management systems for online courses can be a great way of benefiting from technology when it comes to learning. And challenges in using technology in learning will involve the digital divide and access issues. Not everyone has the opportunity to have access to internet connection. Not everyone has a smartphone, and not everyone has access to a computer. There's also the fact that it is difficult for us to often have real-time discussion in a classroom setting because not everyone is opportune to have all of these at their disposal to be present in class all at the same time. And then there's also the need for teacher training in tech tools. A lot of teachers do not understand how to use tech tools to carry out their teaching practice. And because of this difficulty, technology becomes a hindrance to the teaching and the learning process. I want to conclude this presentation by saying that I presented a summary of all that was expected from me from the 10 questions that I had to answer that were divided into five major sections, that were divided into five major sections. And these five major sections had to do with the foundation of educational psychology. It had to do with learning and instruction. It had to do with human development and diversity. It had to do with assessment and evaluation. And finally, special topics in educational psychology that deals with the use of technology in teaching. Thank you so very much for paying attention to my presentation. I am Bo Trustin Nyoke, PhD student, educational psychology.